Good morning, peace. Hi. We're doing HMN stuff today. What's that? Hyper mesh nets. I was going to show you in a book. I've been writing it on the computer. Hyper mesh nets. I had this idea, well, years ago, that the best democracy is the internet. The internet is so inherently democratic in how it runs. Also, we've never had a system that allows really one person, one vote, which the internet does. That we don't need representatives at this point. We need a platform that everyone can make informed group decisions and not be relying on a bundle of representatives who they need to have their reality skewed to even be in that house, and that's not their fault. And they can't outthink an entire nation. And at the point where you're voting on stuff with the internet, almost like borders, they become very much more unnecessary than people standing with guns at barbed wire and saying, I'm going to shoot the poor people who come here. So HyperMeshNet is trying to answer the problem, how do we have an internet that's way more secure than the natural internet so that we can vote on it? Because right now, if you want to vote and cast a vote on the internet, we don't have a security system good enough that you'd really want to trust voting on it. Notably, we do have an internet security system tight enough that we're okay doing money with it. So the idea that we don't have the system already that's capable of running internet voting is perhaps politically motivated and contentious, that if we're safe enough to do banking online, we're safe enough to do voting online, just de facto. But the current internet is based on a premise I'm going to call toll gates and bridges, where if you want to connect to anyone, you've got to go through like a handful of people, and you got to pay them for the pleasure, and your connection to anyone is going to come through tight little lines that are always trusting someone loads, way more than maybe you need to trust anyone, or you would trust someone if you didn't need to trust them that much. Hyper mesh nets is just ah incredible when you think about how secure things can be and how much potential is out there. So we start with this constant called pi, where right now my phone isn't doing anything at all. It's just sitting here, and it's got all of this processing power and all of this networking capabilities and all of this battery and, in fact, loads of stuff that it's not doing anything with. Multiply this just by all the people in my building, and we've got a pretty serious computer just hanging out that isn't being used. Now, Pi, if we take in consideration of Pi of smartphones of this household that I'm in, it's got the processing power, it's got the cameras, it's got the microphones, that you've got this just big shapeless entity of practical, I don't know, useful resource that isn't being used. Um, we never want to tax out each device on the system of a mesh completely, but we can run an entire internet just on the increment that my phone could be doing more without it disturbing me. And that's pi. Not how much more could it do whilst it's sweating and overheating and, ruining my experience, but how much more can my combined devices do without disturbing me. That's why you can run a whole way better internet than we already have on one of those, and then join it up with the normal internet, and it goes loopy. Um, I've written all of this down that I wanted to talk about. I suppose that I'm recapping HMN at this point. There was something that I wanted to think about the types of interception that would still be possible in this system, but we're designed on this basic premise that if I want to send a message to somebody anywhere in this city, let's just suppose that there's always a chain that I could send it to my neighbor, and then their neighbor, and then their neighbor, all within reach of the Wi-Fi capacities of one of these, which is a reasonable assumption. As soon as you can do that, you get to assume that I don't need to send my whole message through any one path. I can send it through two paths so that nobody in between ever gets my whole message. Now, if I encrypt the message beforehand and then split it into 2 bits or more than 2 bits parts, assuming that our encryption algorithm has demonstrated enough diffusion, which means that the encrypted bit that corresponds to this bit in the plaintext isn't going to be there, it's going to be somewhere else in the message. That means that once we split it in half, the half that you get, it doesn't even add up to a whole letter. So it's really, really, really impossible to break because you've only got half of the message and it's not a useful half of the message in any way. So to even intercept this message or to see that it has happened, you need to be in two places at once. And once we consider a mesh where this happens, a mesh that happens, this scattering process at every point, it's way, way, way safe enough to vote on and also makes possible some stuff that's not possible on the general internet. So first of all, if everyone just in my little area decided to install one app that says, I'm going to listen for messages through this network, and when I get them, I'm going to pass them on if they're the ones that are appropriate to me. Well, you've got a massive supercomputer, because my phone's not doing anything. And actually, if I could use my phone a little bit more, there's a certain amount where I use less battery for using more battery, right? That it's better for my phone that it's completely run out of battery by the time I go to charge it, or close to that as possible. But in reality, I've got a fairly regular pattern that I don't keep track of that probably ends up with 20% or 40% of the battery left on there by the time I go to charge it up. So whilst it's doing nothing, it's actually costing the environment more than if I used up a bit more of its unused potential, its pi, and then ran an internet on it. The internet that we're talking about is sending tiny little packets of text, all with one common format, node to node, phone to phone, and making these chains of how to get home. We can do this so that when Alice says, I want to see Bob's site says, yeah, okay, here's your file. That nobody sees that Alice has asked for Bob's site. Nobody has seen that Bob's site has sent anything to Alice, and nobody has seen the contents in between. Because even the request that says, hey, I want to look at Bob's site, we can split that into two before we begin. And we can also have this assumption and axiom that we don't ever tell someone where a message has come from unless we need to. So even though Alice starts the message where she is, nobody needs to know that she started the message. Someone just sees, oh, there's a message heading over there that was asked for from over here. Everyone's phone usually has a GPS system in it. We might not always want to leave our GPS systems on. We might not want to be identified by GPS at all. It's one of the things that we can do. And as long as each node sort of always is what it is, it doesn't matter how we refer to it. So that just whilst you're generally using the internet and even maybe in the least secure contexts that you ever use the internet in, where you really don't care if anyone sees that you visited Google, just that little piece of information. Each message has embedded in it its header, which is which tells the system at each client point where it's got to go next, and the header is how it gets delivered in the end. Protocols for exactly how to do that you can make up on the fly. They don't always need to be the same. I want to skip to that I was trying to plan, because this is all the stuff that I've just written about this morning. There's a kind of intercepting attack. Okay, so when we get further down the line, each node can be timing its peers to see if anything suspicious has happened. And if they're all passing tiny little bits of data at a time, sort of straight through that, I get a message, I sit on, immediately then I process something else, a different message from somewhere else, over the same bits, and the thing that I've transferred on, it's good. It means that if you intercept, the things around you, they can all check, did it take you as long to do the thing that you were supposed to do as it should have taken you to do that thing? To sneak around this requires like teleportation, basically, to try and spoof. Yeah, it did take as long as I told you to do it. And because nobody ever gets entrusted with a whole package, if somebody does interfere with something along the line, they can't interfere with the whole thing, and also without knowing the precise details of the unencrypted message, they can't tamper with the thing in such a way that when you add it to the bits that haven't been tampered with, it creates anything sensible. You'll always find it really easy to tell if someone's tampered with part of your message along the way, because the whole thing won't add up. So some of the time, whenever anything is suspicious, we want to be timing events in and out, and we can time further orders, so that each time something goes into my phone, I say, yeah, I got it. And then I'll say, yeah, I sent it on. If another event comes in and you said you'd sent it on and you hadn't, then we want a way, but we haven't described a way for the system to go, hey, there was a definite delay there. It was only supposed to take you X amount of time to process these 8 bits, but instead it took you like twice X amount of time. And this new thing came in. Oh, so in the cases that we're suspecting something in the middle, we want to send them forwards with an expected time of how long it's going to take to land there. Then when they pass on whatever their message is, there'll be an expected time and a real time to compare between, and the expected time is like if they didn't do anything wrong, and the real time, if it's different, suggests that they did do something wrong. As soon as we identify that something is absolutely wrong on the system, we can just say, well, don't pass that message on any further. Back it up several few things along your path the way you came, and then try and send it again without meeting any of the peers that you met last time. All of the peers that you met last time, all of the good ones, they're all saying whether or not they saw the last message come through. So they just answer the same question again. The message shoots out and should avoid the person who was acting suspiciously. So the default behavior for if we suspect that there is a problem, just send the text back, which doesn't matter to anyone except for the people at two ends, or shouldn't, and then it comes through and doesn't interfere with the particular or proposed interceptor. That's good, and it seems good. We still haven't really figured out what we mean by timing everything. I figure if I connect to my neighbor with this phone and we're sending tiny little packets of data between them, regularly because we just happen to be neighbors. So, anything that's bound through near here is going to be bound through both of our phones probably. So they're in connection all the time, and they can be building up a little profile of how long does it usually take the other phone to process parts of the stream that's coming through, and also how long does it take just immediately when I send the message and when it's received. How long does it take through space to get our phones? This thing shouldn't change very much. Well, neither thing should change very much. How far in time my neighbor's phone is to send through this antenna, uh, and also how long does it take to process a small amount of data on that phone per simple instruction. There'll also be completely random flux in there so that we'll get many false positives. What we can do is have an AI that doesn't really exist anywhere, that's always trying to check out who's suspicious and just tell other parts of the network, maybe someone kind of over there is a bit suspicious, probably. Don't send very useful packages to them. If you've got like half a message, don't ever send them half a message, only send them a tiny little bit of the message. And keep an eye on them. And this kind of instruction can live within the grid, being pushed around different places and warn neighbors and so on. We really want one of those because we want a directory that says where everyone is, where no one has the directory. Every time some stream comes through, it's got some kind of address on it. It's got some mention of where it's going. And then it's going to go there. That gives us, there's something over there called this. For every time any data travels through the network whatsoever, as long as it has a destination. So you don't have to stand in very many places in the network to be able to get quite a good idea of where the other stuff is around you and what they're called. If we have everyone with a permanent address and there's ever a directory somewhere within the system and we're relying on that directory, that if I need to download a file from your phone, I ask the directory, well, where are you? And then it sets us up with a perfect course. That's good, and we can do that all the time, and like that's what we trust the internet to do all the time. But we can get another level of security by not assuming that anyone knows where everyone is. If we try and course these things through GPS, we don't have to tell anyone at any point where the ultimate GPS location is that we're looking for. We can ask at each point, are you closer or further from... I'm going to ask these two things, who is closer and further. With my one layer of decryption that I'm allowed, I can ask, who's closer to this GPS location, this neighbor or this neighbor? These two neighbors, they just tell me their GPS location. Me, I just compare GPS locations to something that I don't know. I mean, we really, if we want to do that, we want a complicated function that that I can check which one is further without knowing from what. What am I trying to do? This is what we had already, that we don't want addresses that are defined by GPS. We want addresses that are going to find their way home by GPS. The address, for me, it's going to be like London, directory 48, folder 3, and folder 3 is the folder that's on my phone. Anyone from outside London just needs to find a course to London. They need to have a route to London, which any traffic in or out of London is going to mention sort of vaguely where London is. So a lot of points on the graph should have a reasonable idea of where London is. Then when this message reaches London, or when this part of a message reaches London, it says directory 48, site 3. Nobody until London knew what any of that meant apart from London, which meant vaguely over here. When the message gets to London and there's a client that goes like, oh yeah, I'm London, we sort of want that person on the outskirts of London to have then a street map that says, well, that's where this website literally is. That's what phone it is. And so you need to make this connection, this connection. But we don't want that person to have the full directory, which means that, anyone who wants to see the website, you have to ask them. They've always got a complete record of the fact that you wanted to see that site or that someone wanted to see that site. It's not good enough. We can have someone on the very edge of the city ask two people a little bit further in, hey, directory 48, site 3, do you guys have any information about that? And what we want is for them to both have half the information about it, that they can't read directory 48, site 3 with their data at all until they both send to the person on the outskirts just their halves of that line, and then those halves of that line add up to what is said about specifically where this website is, perhaps by GPS or perhaps by other things. We're allowed to have different locations and different locations formats all playing nicely with each other and convert between when we need to. At that point, getting to London is an easy question everywhere. That you don't need to have very many Londons to get everyone in a nice big group, roughly, so that you, instead of needing to ask 7 billion people who and where they are, you just need to ask like 5,000 if you want one for each city. But at all times you're going to have transfers going in, so that if you're nearby anyone who cares about anything in London, your phone's going to be nearby to some idea about where London is. Once we get to London, okay, we've got to have waiting these two halves of directories, or however many pieces we want the directories in. We also wanted elsewhere the idea that if I get an event on my phone, something to pass through, I'm going to tell the person who sent it to me, I got it, I sent it on. We want to be able to isolate, well, I think on the everyday internet, we want one standard protocol that's really, really safe and also kind of minimal in how many times we check things. I can send, say I've got some chain between here and here. I number all the points along it, and some of them I number as odd and some I number as even in the usual way. And then at each odd node, I want to have it check Does it say the same thing as the even node? I'm going to send the message 2 times independently and have them ask, are we still the same message at each point that they go across? If not, we can back it up to the last place where everything seemed unsuspicious and send it again through a course that just specifically doesn't meet those points. This is to get around the problem that perhaps a client somewhere says, no, I've never seen that message before, but it is the message that they've seen, and then they get both parts, and they've still got to deal with the fact that it's encrypted to the standards that we find possible. But we don't want people to be able to say, no, I've never seen that message, and they have. So we want witnesses standing all the way around, where if I ever receive a message, well, my neighbors should know that I received that message. And if it's just the immediate neighbors, still we've got this kind of rippling effect where we want that rippling to add up into the directory that people coming from outside London would maybe ask, what's this London directory? The directory doesn't have to exist anywhere. But at certain points, nodes need to take it upon themselves to take information that they have and then about locations and then split it up and send it to different places, which is new. We didn't see that anywhere before, but now we need partial location data so that people can have partial location data when it's asked for. How does that work? They need to just collaborate with anyone else for a little bit and say, well, I'm going to take part of this data and you take the other part. Once you've done that, you've got 2 tiny address books that add up to 1 full address. We really want the rippling system to be able to compile it into as few big address books as it can, and then distribute where those address books are around its system wisely. So what does it do? You take everyone's telling their peers what events have happened. They all say a sort of direction. Well, there's something in this direction. There's X in this direction. So far, we haven't even told the places in between what anyone's address is. Have we? No. But we want some people having addresses. So, well, my address has got to start on my phone, I guess. So I turn on my phone, I turn on the client, I say, give me an address. It's going to say London. And then what? Look around for an address that hasn't been used. If we use the time very narrowly, then there's very little chance that my address can be the same as someone else's. We can reduce that down kind of as much as we like and try and get around checking, does that address already exist? That doesn't sound very good. Because obviously someone can just stand anywhere on the network and say, well, I'm at your address. That would be the least good thing. GPS works really well for 2-factor verification, that if we have an HMN.com that sits at the center and everything that you send to HMN.com just goes through your data contract or someone buys data contract. It doesn't have anything to do with the mesh. So we can get a good indication that someone is where they are or where they say they are by checking their GPS. No, I've seen phones spoof GPS easily. Not with information about you can't lie about your speed and your timings at the same time without it being really obvious. So one protocol is that you send it, each node puts a timestamp and puts to the next one. Says my thing is unstable. Please wait till we try to connect you. Okay. We could have a protocol where wherever the message goes, we stamp it with a timestamp and a GPS distance, which is how far it needed to go for the next one or for the last one. In each case, well, the next thing along can say, did that take us roughly as long as we thought it was going to take? If so, just encrypt over what you had and send it on with a new timestamp, a new thingamabob. Yeah, this is what we want to do. The message changes form at every point that it comes across. Each one checks, did that take about the right amount of time? It does whatever it likes with it. Once all the pieces get to the end, the best check that nothing dodgy has happened, or at least that it hasn't been interfered with, is that it all stacks up together. But as the recipient, you would also get a list of GPS distances and timestamps that you could look at those and go, well, was something weird there, that something took too much time? If so, or if not, you get to choose at your client's end what you're going to do with that information. Also around the system, whilst we're building up directories, we want to be building up profiles of just what potentially seems dodgy on the system in terms of time delays and expected time results. In the same process that we're making the directory that allows us to locate people without having anyone in charge of knowing where everyone is, that directory also can fill up with nuts of information that maybe something suspicious is happening at certain addresses. Probably get appended to the end of the address as the system sees it. Makes it really, really public. Anything that's coursing to or from there has this little nat in its address that says maybe something is dodgy over here. Obviously, if you see more than one dodgy thing, or it adds to your information about what to do. It seems really perfect. What's the worst an attacker can do now if we've got all of those constraints? What can you do as a client that's sneaky? Say it's always going to be the case that if you get some data, you can copy that data, and even if everyone around you then goes, "Whoa, you took a lot of time when you weren't supposed to take any time," you still got that data, you still copied it. We try and mitigate this by sending people only data that's not useful at a time, and it only stacks up where they need it to stack up. So pretty. They can try and say, we've never seen part of this message, and they have seen part of that message, and then they get 2 bits which can connect and be useful. This requires being in the right place at the right time, and also we can send messages that intentionally swirl around the system trying to avoid this problem. But if they did stand in the right places at the right times simultaneously, got the message which is chaotically coursing through this network, but if you get really close to them, it's less chaotic. And they say, no, I've never seen part of this message before. We want to make a clear distinction about being the destination of messages, where it kind of hangs out in this list to be connected up with other pieces of singly unreadable information, and then that's the destination. What happens at a destination? Always some data is joined with some other data to be pieced back together and read. At every other location, that never happens. There's never a reason to do anything with the data that's traveling through the network other than to send it straight on. But if you're an attacker, you might want to do something different. You might want to get both pieces of that message. If the client is in charge of putting those 2 things back together, awesome. If the client is in charge of putting those 2 things together, well, let's say the client always mentions, hey, I put 2 things back together and I got this, and it just tells its peers, and none of them really know what to do with it. But if it's something suspect or it's something dodgy, it'll be all we need to know to see what has happened. They can take, in that case, readings from the hard drive of exactly what those bits were. And we want to make sure that the only way that they can combine them together is within the client. Because if they try and take those 2 pieces of information and it does somehow add up to the whole message, and they stick them together outside of the client, trying to get around mentioning to everyone, I stuck these 2 pieces of information together, the answer is going to be they can't. Because how to stick those pieces back together is going to be a function that only the client can find out at that moment. Now, do we have such thing as only the client can find out at that moment? We kind of don't. Well, sticking them back together is going to have to be predicated on information that they don't have, but they can always ask their peers for permission to stick it back together, and then at that point, their peers are going to be like, what? You want to stick back the message that is for Sophie? You can't stick back the message that's meant for Sophie. You're not Sophie. You're just supposed to be one of the intermediate things. So now they would have to lie and say that they are Sophie, but they're surrounded by all these people who, a minute ago, they sent them a message that was meant to go straight through them on the premise exactly that they're not Sophie. And they know that they're nearby to who they're nearby. That is it. I can't think of how to write it up at this moment, but I think that is what I want. Just this idea of ripples, and we didn't really make the directory, but we know lots of things that the directory does. We've also got this idea now that for a protocol that we send messages, and each point they hit along the way, we add a little bit more information and encrypt a further time. Once we do that, it should be also very easy, or relatively easier, to check has somebody, because it doesn't cost us any time to do that at all, really. But it will cost someone to reverse that in any way. And in this way, yeah, it's pretty. Like, neighbors don't have to know anything about each other. It would be cool then if another AI could come in and, well, it can, and see what that inner one was doing, and it compiles amongst itself more privileged information than any of the nodes within its scope. That's great. Well, it really, really seems like a better internet, so we'll leave you with that. I still haven't done, I'm about to hit sobriety hard like a wall, it's gonna kill me. You can see I'm already pale. I haven't done the thing about the Crookes radiometer computer. It just completely stood behind hypermesh nets is the thing that I wanted to write down. But we should have better computers soon too.